Welcome to Go Readling Bedtime Stories, presented by GoReadling.com, personalized education and reading skills for kids. Find a comfortable spot, close your eyes, take a slow, deep breath, and let our story carry you gently off to sleep. Tonight's story is called The Little Match Girl. It was the last evening of the year, New Year's Eve, and the cold was bitter and deep. Snow had been falling all day, thick and white, covering the city in a soft, frozen blanket. The rooftops wore caps of white, the lampposts wore scarves of ice. The cobblestone streets, usually busy with carts and carriages, were quiet now, muffled by the snow that crunched and squeaked underfoot. The sky was a deep, heavy gray, and the wind blew sharp and biting through the narrow streets, finding every gap in every coat and every crack in every window. But behind those windows, warm golden light glowed. Families were gathering for their New Year's Eve suppers. The smell of roasting goose drifted from the chimneys, rich and warm and wonderful, mixing with the sweet scent of baking bread and the spicy smell of cinnamon and cloves. You could hear laughter and the clink of plates and the crackle of fires and hearths. The city was getting ready to celebrate, to leave the old year behind and welcome the new one with warmth and food and love. But not everyone had a warm home to go to that night. Through the snowy streets walked a little girl, small and thin, with bare feet that were red and raw from the cold. She had left home that morning wearing a pair of old slippers that had belonged to her mother, but the slippers were far too big, and she had lost them both crossing the street. One was carried off by a cart, and the other had been snatched up by a boy who ran away laughing, saying he would use it as a cradle for his cat someday. So now the little girl walked barefoot through the snow, and each step sent a sharp, icy sting through her toes and up into her ankles. Her feet had turned from red to blue to a pale, frightening white. She wore a thin, old dress that had been patched many times and a faded shawl around her narrow shoulders, but the wind cut right through them both. Her hair was long and fair, with soft curls that would have been pretty if they were not tangled and dusted with snowflakes. In her apron, she carried bundles of matches, and she held one bundle in her small, stiff hand, hoping someone might buy them. She had been walking all day, through street after street, calling out in her small, thin voice, "Matches! Matches for sale! A penny a bundle!" But no one had stopped. No one had bought a single match. The people hurried past with their heads down and their collars up, thinking only of getting home to their own warm fires. Some did not even see her. She was so small, and the world was so big and so cold, and everyone was in such a rush. A man in a heavy coat walked right past as if she were invisible. A woman carrying packages glanced at her and looked away. Two children, bundled in wool and laughing, ran by without a second glance. The little girl did not blame them. She understood that on a night like this, people wanted to be inside, not standing in the snow buying matches from a ragged girl. But each time someone passed without stopping, her heart sank a little lower, and the cold crept a little deeper into her bones. The girl was afraid to go home. Her father would be angry that she had not sold any matches or earned any money. Their home was hardly warmer than the street anyway, just an attic room with cracks in the walls where the wind whistled through, and only a thin, ragged blanket on a straw mattress. But at least her father would not shout at her there if she brought home coins. She thought of her grandmother, who had died the year before. Grandmother had been the only person in the world who had been truly kind to her, who had held her close and told her stories and called her "my little star." Grandmother's lap had been warm and soft, and her voice had been gentle, and her eyes had been full of love. When grandmother was alive, the world had not felt so cold. Even in winter, there had been warmth, because there had been someone who loved her. Now grandmother was gone, and the world was very cold indeed. The girl blinked back tears, because if you cried in this cold, the tears froze on your cheeks. The streets grew emptier as the evening deepened. The lamplighter had come and gone, and the gas lamps cast pale, flickering circles of light on the snow. Through the windows of the houses, the girl could see families sitting down to their suppers. In one window, a great goose sat golden and glistening on a platter, surrounded by roasted apples. In another, a Christmas tree glittered with candles, its branches hung with tiny glass ornaments that caught the light like diamonds. Children in clean, warm clothes sat around a table, their faces bright with excitement. A mother ladled soup into bowls, and steam rose in curling wisps. A father carved the meat and passed the plates. The little girl pressed her cold nose against the glass and watched, her breath making a small circle of fog on the window. The warmth inside was so close, just on the other side of the glass, but it might as well have been on the other side of the world. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and walked on. The girl turned a corner and found herself in a narrow alley between two tall houses. The walls rose high on either side, blocking some of the wind, and the snow here was a little less steep. She sat down in the corner where the two houses met, drawing her knees up to her chest and tucking her bare feet underneath her dress, trying to make herself as small as possible. But the cold was everywhere. It seeped up from the frozen ground, crept in through her thin dress, and wrapped around her like an icy hand. Her fingers were so stiff she could barely feel them. Her teeth chattered. She looked down at the matches in her apron. If she lit just one match, just one, it might warm her fingers for a moment. She would only sell one fewer match, and one match was such a tiny thing. Her father might not even notice. She pulled a match from the bundle, held it in her trembling fingers, and struck it against the brick wall. It sputtered, hissed, and burst into a bright, warm flame. What a wonderful flame it was! It burned clear and steady, casting a warm, golden glow on the girl's face and hands. And as she stared into the flickering light, something magical happened. The cold, dark alley seemed to melt away, and in its place, she saw a great iron stove, black and shiny, with brass knobs and a roaring fire inside. The heat radiated from it in beautiful, soothing waves. She could feel it on her face, on her fingers, on her poor frozen toes. It was the most delicious warmth she had ever known, like being wrapped in a blanket that had been warmed by the sun. She stretched her feet toward the stove and sighed with happiness. But then the match burned down to her fingers and went out, and the wonderful stove vanished. She was sitting in the cold, dark alley again, holding a burnt matchstick, and the wind was howling overhead, and her fingers were colder than ever. The warmth was gone. The vision was gone. She was alone again in the bitter night. The girl looked at the burnt match in her hand, then at the bundle in her apron. She knew she should not light another, but the memory of that beautiful warmth was so strong and the cold was so terrible that she could not help herself. She struck a second match against the wall. The flame leaped up, bright and golden, and again the alley disappeared. This time she saw a room, a beautiful, warm room with a table set for a feast. A white tablecloth covered the table, and on it sat the most wonderful food she had ever seen. A great roasted goose, golden brown and glistening with juice, sat on a silver platter, stuffed with apples and prunes, and the smell was so rich and wonderful that the girl's empty stomach ached with longing. There were dishes of mashed potatoes topped with melting butter, and bowls of sweet red cabbage, and a basket of warm bread rolls. And then the most amazing thing happened. The goose stood up on its silver platter, waddled across the table with a knife and fork stuck in its back, and came straight toward her, as if offering itself. The girl reached out her hand to touch it. But the match went out. and the feast vanished. The tablecloth, the goose, the warm bread, the buttery potatoes, all gone in an instant, and there was only the cold brick wall in front of her, rough and dark and spotted with ice. The girl shivered violently. She was so cold now that she could not feel her feet at all, and her hands shook so hard she could barely hold the matches. She struck a third match. This time, the most beautiful Christmas tree appeared before her, taller and more magnificent than any she had ever seen, even through the richest shop windows. It was decorated with hundreds of candles, their tiny flames dancing like stars caught in the branches. Glass ornaments of every color, red and blue and gold and silver and green, hung from the boughs, reflecting the candlelight in 1,000 tiny points of brilliance. Strings of golden beads wound around the tree, like rivers of light, and at the very top, a silver star blazed so brightly that it seemed to light up the entire sky. The girl reached up toward the beautiful tree, her eyes wide with wonder. The candles on the branches seemed to rise higher and higher, until she realized they were not candles at all, but stars, the real stars in the dark winter sky above the alley. One of the stars fell, streaking across the sky in a long, bright trail of light. The girl watched it and remembered something her grandmother had once told her. "When a star falls," grandmother had said, holding the girl on her lap by the warm fire, "it means a soul is going up to heaven." The girl thought about that as she sat in the cold alley, and a deep, quiet ache filled her chest, not of cold, but of longing. She missed her grandmother so much that it hurt, a pain far worse than the cold in her fingers or the hunger in her stomach. She missed the gentle arms that had held her, the soft voice that had told her stories, the warm lap that had been her safest place in all the world. She struck another match against the wall, and this time, as the flame bloomed bright and golden in the darkness, she saw the most wonderful vision of all. There, in the warm glow of the match, stood her grandmother. She looked just as the girl remembered her, but even more beautiful, bathed in soft golden light, her face kind and loving, her eyes bright with tenderness. She wore her best dress, the one with the tiny blue flowers, and her silver hair was pinned up neatly, and she smiled the smile that had always made everything feel safe. "Grandmother!" the girl cried, reaching out her hands. "Oh, grandmother, you are here! Please do not go. Please do not disappear when the match goes out, like the warm stove and the beautiful goose and the Christmas tree. Please take me with you. I know you will go away when the match burns down. Please, grandmother, stay." The grandmother's image flickered in the light, warm and close and impossibly real, and the girl could almost feel the softness of her grandmother's hand, almost smell the lavender and rosewater that had always clung to her clothes. The girl did not wait for the match to die. She grabbed the whole bundle of matches and struck them all at once against the wall. They blazed up together in a great, brilliant burst of light, brighter than midday, brighter than 100 candles, brighter than the sun itself. And in that dazzling golden radiance, grandmother appeared more clearly than ever, larger than life, glowing with warmth and love. She opened her arms wide, and the girl felt herself lifted up, weightless and warm, into her grandmother's embrace. The cold vanished, the hunger vanished, the loneliness and the fear and the sadness vanished. There was only warmth, deep and gentle and infinite, and the feeling of being held by someone who loved her completely. "Grandmother," the girl whispered, pressing her face into the soft folds of her grandmother's dress. "Do not leave me. Take me with you." And grandmother smiled and held her close and whispered back, "I will never leave you again, my little star. Never again." Together, They rose upward through the golden light, higher and higher, above the rooftops and the chimneys and the falling snow, above the city with its glowing windows and its sleeping families, up into the great, dark, star-filled sky. The cold could not touch them here. The wind could not reach them. They were wrapped in warmth and light, and the stars around them sparkled like diamonds scattered on black velvet. The girl looked down and saw the city far below, tiny and quiet, its lights twinkling like a reflection of the stars above. She felt no fear, no sadness, no pain. She felt only peace, a deep, still, perfect peace, and the steady warmth of her grandmother's arms around her. "Where are we going, grandmother?" she asked softly. "Somewhere warm," grandmother said, "where there is no cold and no hunger and no loneliness. Somewhere you will never have to be afraid again." And the girl smiled, because she believed her. She believed her completely. They flew on together through the gentle darkness, the stars growing brighter and closer, until the girl could almost reach out and touch them. Each star hummed with a soft, warm light, and the space between the stars was not empty, but filled with a quiet golden glow, like sunlight filtering through honey. The girl felt as though she were floating in a warm bath of light. Her grandmother held her hand, and the hand was warm and real and steady, and the girl knew that this time the warmth would not disappear when a match went out. This warmth was forever. She closed her eyes and let herself be carried, and a smile spread across her face, the most peaceful, contented smile you could imagine, the smile of someone who has finally, after a very long time, come home. In the morning, when the first pale light of the new year crept over the city and the church bells began to ring, people found the little girl in the alley between the two houses. She was sitting in the corner with her back against the wall, a bundle of burnt matches beside her, and on her face was the most beautiful, peaceful smile. Her cheeks were pale but rosy, as if she were dreaming a lovely dream. The people who found her spoke softly and shook their heads. She was trying to warm herself, they said, looking at the burnt matches. But they did not know, could not know, about the wonderful things she had seen. The glowing stove and the golden goose, and the magnificent Christmas tree, and the grandmother who had held her and carried her up among the stars. They did not know that in her last moments, she had not been cold or frightened or alone. She had been warm, perfectly warm, and loved, perfectly loved. And she had gone to a place where she would never be cold again. The people of the city buried the little girl and placed flowers on her grave, and the story of the match girl spread through the streets and the houses and the shops, and something changed in that city. People began to look more carefully at the world around them. They noticed the old woman who sat alone on the bench in the square, and they brought her soup. They noticed the boy with no coat who shivered by the fountain, and they gave him a warm jacket. They noticed the family in the attic room with cracks in the walls, and they helped them mend the cracks and brought them blankets and firewood. It was as if the little match girl's story had lit a flame of its own. Not a match flame that flickered and went out, but a steady, lasting flame of kindness that burned in people's hearts and warmed the whole city. Because that is what stories do, dear child. They remind us to look, to notice, to care for each other, especially when the world is cold. Sometimes on a winter evening, when the snow falls softly and the wind blows cold, someone in that city will light a candle and set it in the window, a small warm flame flickering against the darkness. They do it to remember the little match girl and to say to anyone passing by in the cold, "You are seen. You are not alone. There is warmth here for you." And if you look closely at the candle flame, really closely, you might see something wonderful in its golden glow. a kind face smiling, a gentle hand reaching out, a love so warm and bright that no amount of cold can ever put it out. The snow fell softly outside the windows. The city grew quiet. The church bells rang one last time, their deep, gentle notes drifting across the rooftops and fading into the starry sky. Families tucked their children into warm beds and kissed their foreheads and whispered goodnight. Candles flickered in windows, casting warm golden squares of light onto the fresh white snow below. The world settled into the deep, peaceful stillness that comes at the very end of a long day, when everything is quiet and everything is calm and everything is ready for sleep. And so, dear child, as you lie in your own warm bed, with your own soft blankets and your own pillow beneath your head, remember the little match girl and the light she carried. Remember that even the smallest flame can warm a cold heart, and even the smallest kindness can change someone's world. You are warm tonight, and you are loved, and that is a very great and precious thing. Hold it close. And tomorrow, when you go out into the world, be a light for someone else. Be the warmth that a cold hand reaches for. Be the kindness that a lonely heart needs. That is the best way to honor the little match girl's story, by making sure that no one around you has to face the cold alone. Now close your eyes, little one, and let the soft glow of all the love around you carry you gently into the sweetest dreams. Good night, dear child. Sleep well. You are so very, very loved. And that is the end of our story. Thank you for listening to Go Readling Bedtime Stories. Visit goreadling.com for more stories, reading adventures, and fun learning for kids. Sweet dreams, little one. Good night.